Well, it's truly an honor to be able to be here and share my testimony. Thank you so much to Ken Ham, Tim Chafee, who wrote all the words you see in a lot of these exhibits, and Alan Green, who designed a lot of these exhibits, and the entire team for including me in this. Truly an honor. I think that this is the most eternally impactful opportunity I've had to share my testimony because of what the Creation Museum is. And so I am joined by my husband, my children, my parents, my in-laws, and my sister-in-law tonight because we believe in what is happening through this exhibit and through this museum. This is actually my third time to walk through the museum, and the other two times I had just my dad with me, and he, who has a doctorate, he's from Dallas Seminary, he said it's the most gospel-centered attraction in the world, and he might be a little hard to impress sometimes, so. So I want to encourage you tonight as you hear my testimony, because I think that God has called me and you, every single one of us, to be a certain type of person. And it takes a certain type of person to be able to talk about things that truly matter, to care about the souls of other people. And that's a person of integrity, someone who stands for truth and wisdom, someone who isn't ashamed of who God created you to be, and He created every single one of us to be set apart from this world. And a person who has confidence in disappointment, because you can trust the God who goes before you. And as you'll hear through my testimony tonight, that last part about having confidence in disappointment, because I can trust the God who goes before me, that is the biggest message of my story tonight. Because 13 years ago, I found out the most shocking news that you'll hear as you walk through the exhibit as well. I grew up as an adopted child. My parents are here with me, and I had the most wonderful upbringing. Do we have any adoptive parents here tonight? Yes. I grew up in a Christian home by a couple in Texas, and they raised my sister and I so well. They actually told us all our life that we were wanted, chosen, and loved, and we believed that about ourselves. Adoption was our normal. We don't remember finding out about being adopted. It was just, this is how God created our family, and this was wonderful. And so you can imagine our surprise when we got to school, to elementary school and middle school, and kids would say things like, "We're so sorry you're adopted," or "What was it like at the orphanage?" That's not our story. It's somebody's story, but that's not our story. And so we were always so surprised by that. And I think it's because people had seen the movie Annie, and they thought we lived with Miss Hannigan. But all we knew to be true about ourselves was that we were wanted, chosen, and loved, that adoption was our normal, that God wrote our story perfectly, that we had birth mothers, that we were so grateful for them, that they could possibly become a part of our story one day, and that was okay, because we could trust the God who goes before us. And so adoption was a part of our conversation. But I think if you would have asked me if I would ever be the type of person who'd been affected by abortion, I would have said no. I would have said, I will never be that type of person. That type of person doesn't go to my school, isn't a part of my family, isn't anything like me, doesn't sit in the pews of my church. But what I realized 13 years ago was that I was so wrong, that I am the type of person who's been impacted by abortion. In college, I learned what an abortion clinic was when I drove past a Planned Parenthood. I saw people out there praying. I didn't know that they performed abortions. I certainly didn't know they were our nation's largest abortion provider. And I remember thinking after they told me what they did, I thought it was incredible because they were pointing people in the direction of pregnancy centers. They were walking alongside women in their moment of crisis. I loved everything that they were representing, but I said, that will never be me. I am the world's biggest introvert. I hate controversy more than anyone I know. I don't like being out of my comfort zone, and so I will never do that. But that was my first glimpse of God's bigger picture for my life. Around that time, my sister met her birth mother, and I remember meeting my sister's birth mother, finding out who she was, why she placed my sister for adoption, how incredibly loving and selfless she was, seeing how much they looked alike, how much they acted alike. And that was the moment where I humanized my birth mother for the first time. I was 20 years old, and I thought I would love to get to know my birth mother. And so I went home and I had a discussion with my parents about the possibility of meeting my birth mother. And I called my adoption agency up the next day after we all agreed that we would love the opportunity to hopefully meet my birth mother. And a woman named Debbie answered the phone. And I told her my name. I told her I wanted to meet my birth mother, hopefully. And she said, well, Claire, this is going to sound really weird. And it did. She said, I'm actually staring at your baby picture. I've had it here for 20 years, almost 21 years at this point. And she said, you were so tiny. You have those little casts on your feet and this harness on your hips. You were such a special baby. I was actually your birth mother's caseworker 20 years ago. And she said, now I work in reunion services, and so I'll do my best to try to find your birth mother. And I hung up the phone thinking that was a really weird conversation. I mean, why would she keep my picture out of all the baby pictures for 20 years? But what I realized a few months later was that she knew what I didn't know, what you're about to find out, that my life was really a miracle. She gave me a call on Christmas Eve of 2008, and she said my birth mother would love to meet me. And so we set that meeting up. We had this incredible first meeting. I planned everything from what we would wear to eat to listen to, brought pictures for her. The moment she opened the door when she got to where we were meeting, I instantly knew I loved her. We looked alike, we acted alike. I thought, this is exactly what I wanted, this picture-perfect meeting with my birth mother, just like my sister's was. And so we planned a second meeting, and this time I flew to Oklahoma, and I brought a gift for her. It was a ring and a necklace with my birthstone on it. And then I wrote a card to go with it. And for whatever reason, all I wrote was, thank you for choosing life for me. And I got there, and I gave her the ring and the necklace, and she cried really happy tears. And then I gave her the card. And when she read the words, everything changed in the room. And I remember being so confused by her response, because this was supposed to be our happy moment. This was supposed to be my moment where I told her everything she longed to hear for 21 years at this point, how grateful I was to her, how wonderful my life had been because of her. And yet I was met with the most painful look in her eyes, a pain that I knew I had never experienced before, I had never seen in anyone's eyes before, and all she kept repeating was, I didn't choose life for you, Claire. Your life is a miracle. I'm so sorry I didn't. And we actually walked into another room and sat on a bed, and she began to tell me about being pregnant with me at 13 years old, and how her mother said there was only one choice for her, and that was to have an abortion. She was 5 months along in her pregnancy, which was a dismemberment abortion. And she said her mother took her to that abortion clinic. She had her abortion surrounded by doctors and nurses who never spoke to her, who had never asked her what her choice would have been. She said it was the most painful procedure she's ever experienced. And her mother told her to go home and pretend like it never happened, act like things would go back to normal, but it didn't. She said she waited weeks for things to hopefully get back to normal. after her abortion, but they didn't. And so she returned to the abortion clinic, and the doctor told her that she had actually been pregnant with twins and that they had accidentally missed my body during the abortion that successfully aborted my twin. And they asked her what she would like to do, and her mother quickly spoke up and said, "My daughter's still 13. She's still not ready to be a mother. We need a second abortion." And so my birth mother was driven to Kansas to have a second abortion. And after examining her, the miraculous thing is that these doctors who did every type of abortion that there was, up until the moment of birth and even after, they turned her away because they had ripped the sac that I was in during the abortion that successfully aborted my twin. And so it was too dangerous for my birth mother to have that abortion. And so I survived 2 abortion facilities in my birth mother's womb. My birth mother was then dropped off after the unsuccessful second abortion attempt. She was dropped off at the adoption agency, Deaconess in Oklahoma City, where Debbie was her caseworker, and she lived there for a few weeks until I was born prematurely, at 10 weeks premature, weighing 3 pounds, 2 ounces, with a dislocated hip, with club feet. And then I went through what my parents picked me up from the hospital at 2 months old, gave me a home, gave me a name, made me wanted, chosen, loved. I'm so grateful for that. And then over the course of 2 years, I went through body casts and visited the Children's Crippled Hospital as the doctors did everything they could to correct these complications that had happened to my body. The miraculous thing is my birth mother was told that the abortion caused these complications for her because I had a dry birth. But doctors who have reviewed my records wonder, could it be that these were complications because I was a twin and maybe the abortion instruments never touched my body? As you can imagine, finding out I survived my birth mother's abortion, that I was a twin, was the greatest shock of my life. The most life-altering moment of my life was when my birth mother told me the most life-altering moment of hers. And all I knew to do was to call my parents. And so I did, and they said something to me that changed my life, changed my perspective forever. Still to this day, this is what led me to stages across the country, getting 100% out of my comfort zone, because this truly matters. They said, God's fingerprints are all over your life, Claire. He must have a really big plan for you. You get to choose to trust God. Imagine what he will do if you're willing. And so my new reality in that moment was I was an abortion survivor and I was a twinless twin. I was rejected, unwanted, and aborted. But what my parents just told me, what they told me all my life, came crashing down into my heart, into my soul, because I knew as they said those words that my circumstances, that's not what defined me. What defined me was what they spoke over me all my life, that I was wanted, chosen, loved, forgiven, redeemed. And so I had a choice in that moment as I sat face to face with my birth mother, as she wept and she apologized and she told me that she aborted me, that she aborted my twin. I had a choice, and I chose to forgive. I chose to do the most impossible thing, and my birth mother's told me time and time again how she expected me to run out of the room that day and never look back. In fact, an interview we did a couple years ago with Focus on the Family, she said, Claire, I aborted your twin, then I tried to abort you, and then when that didn't work, I gave you away. How could you ever love or forgive me? But instead of running from Tanya, miraculously, God gave me his heart for her. And I embraced her and I held her as she cried. And the reason I was able to do that is because of how I was raised. I knew that all of the things that God said about me, that I am wanted, chosen, and loved, he said about her. I knew that what Jesus did for me, on the cross, he did that for her. So after processing the news, I went back to the people on the sidewalk, those people that had been praying, the people I said I would never go back to, I would never do that. That's who I went to because I didn't even know how to go back to my world, my reality, my friends, my family, and tell them this is what I found out about myself. And so I went back to those people and they cried with me. They listened and then they said, Claire, you need to share this story. And of course I thought, no, not me. Not the most introverted person that you know. There's no way God could use me in that way. But I tried it. I spoke to a group of high schoolers and middle schoolers after I called my birth mother and asked her if I could share her deepest, darkest, most painful secret with people across the country, across the world. And for whatever reason, miraculously, she said yes, so that no other little girl, woman, man, family has to experience what we have because of abortion. I spoke to this group of middle schoolers and high schoolers, and as I stood there and shared my story, I just watched as the light bulbs went off in their head as they were able to humanize the unborn child through my testimony. And I realized then that if God asked me to go, I would go. And he has a sense of humor because he's asked me about 30 times a year since then. But I believe truly that God gave me my story for such a time as this so that every single one of us can know the face and the name and the story of the aborted child. Because when you look at my face, you're looking at my twin, the aborted baby. But also so we can know the face and the name and the story of the woman like my birth mother who's desperately looking for someone to say, you're worthy. You can do it. You are strong enough. You are capable, and I am going to walk alongside you every step of the way. If you're like me, I never let the reality of abortion and who we are missing sink into my mind or into my heart, not until I learned that I barely escaped death through abortion. What if we let that reality of what abortion is and what it does move us to action? To prayerful action, to talking about it with our friends, to supporting ministries who are doing something to educate people, like this museum, like this new exhibit. It truly is incredible. How many of you have seen the movie Unplanned? Okay, not enough. So write it down. It's on Amazon. Actually, it's out here, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Excuse me. It's a movie about my friend Abby, who ran an abortion clinic for 8 years. And after seeing an ultrasound-guided abortion, excuse me, and a baby lose its life on an ultrasound screen, she left her job at Planned Parenthood. And she uses her experience to open the eyes of people to the reality of abortion. And a couple years ago, I was invited to go to a behind-the-scenes filming of a scene in this movie. And I met her actually 2 weeks after she left her job because she was there praying with the people on the sidewalk when I went back to them. And so I asked Abby if I could bring my birth mother to this behind-the-scenes filming. And she said yes. It was being filmed in the very town, Stillwater, Oklahoma, where my birth mother had her abortion. And she happened to live 10 minutes away. And so I thought this would be great. And when I got there, what I realized was that we were touring the abortion procedure room, an abortion procedure room like the one my birth mother went to at 13 years old. And I thought, what have I done? What have I walked her into? She is going to revisit every feeling, every emotion that she experienced at 13 years old. But it was too late, and we went into this abortion procedure room, and sure enough, she cried. She held my hand. She cried. She said, I remember the smells. I remember the sounds. I remember being alone. I remember what happened to my baby? And I thought, what have I done? This is horrific. But then afterwards, Abby invited all of us into a room for dinner. And she stood up in front of all of us. And Abby talked about the forgiveness of God and what that has meant for her, how he's forgiven her for the 8 years she participated in the abortion industry. And my birth mother leaned over to me and she said, Claire, if God could forgive Abby, I wonder if he could forgive me. And this is why I'm so honored to share my testimony in the new Fearfully and Wonderfully Made exhibit. Because it not only shares the truth about God creating life in his image with a purpose and a plan, but it shares about the forgiveness that is available to those who believe and trust in him. When I learned I was an abortion survivor, it was hard to know where to turn. I was navigating my new reality in a world that didn't want me to exist because my humanity exposed the humanity of the unborn baby. And I was surrounded by Christians who were completely silent, just like my family was for 21 years. And as I began to share my story, I realized the importance of stepping out of my comfort zone, to say the things and expose the reality that no one else, especially Christians, wanted to talk about. It's uncomfortable. But as I began to share my story, I realized two things. I realized that one, we're missing grace and an opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus. So my question is, why are Christians so uncomfortable with mercy, grace, and forgiveness? Have you ever asked yourself that question? And the second thing is our unwillingness to be uncomfortable and our silence sends women into abortion clinics as their safe place and allows women who've had abortions to suffer silently in the pews of our churches and our neighborhoods and our families, never knowing the forgiveness of God. That is what our apathy and our silence does. Planned Parenthood has been saying for decades, we're here for you. Why aren't we? Today, as I listened to Ken Ham speak earlier, I heard him say that Christians should be wearing Jesus on our sleeves. In other words, telling everyone we know about him. And tonight, I just want to piggyback on that and say that Christians should be wearing God's forgiveness, grace, and mercy on our sleeves. And I think that is represented so well tonight in this new exhibit, and I'm so excited for you to get to go see it. Because as you just heard through my testimony, these things matter for someone like my birth mother, for someone like me, for someone like you. Tonight, as I walked through the new Fearfully and Wonderfully Made exhibit, I imagine the impact it will have. I thought about my birth mother and how her life would have been different, how our story could have been different if her family had visited an exhibit like this before her moment of crisis. I may be telling you a completely different story and have my twin standing right next to me. And I thought about the day she will hopefully walk through in the future and the healing that God will begin in her life in that moment as she reads the words that Tim wrote and see what Alan and his team have created, how impactful that day will be for her and how impactful that day will be for so many other women and men and families who've been impacted by life and adoption and abortion and so many other things. I want to give you an example of the long-term impact that this moment tonight, that this exhibit can have. And I like to use my daughter Sadie June as this a domino effect example. My husband and I have 4 children, but Sadie June is my only biological child. And I realized the day that I had her, that if I hadn't survived my birth mother's abortion, that she wouldn't be here. And I realized that one day she may grow up to be a mother and a grandmother and a great-grandmother and so on and so forth, and that none of that would be possible if I hadn't survived my birth mother's abortion. One life. If my life hadn't happened, all of that wouldn't be possible. That's the domino effect of abortion in our country. But not just that. That's the domino effect of the impact that this exhibit and our willingness to be generous in our support of this incredible ministry tonight. That's the domino effect of every single person who walks through this exhibit, and it changes their life. The impact is life or death, physically and spiritually. And so I want to close with one final story, and it's our hope story. I call this my victory moment, but it's your victory moment too, because I know my story can be hard to hear, it's hard to share, but we do have hope tonight. I always imagined the first time my birth mother would come to see me speak, and I thought it would be according to my plans, but I should have known better. An organization called me and surprised me. They said, "We found your birth mother and we're flying her in to see you speak." This was about 2 years ago. And this was my greatest fear. I mean, I thought, how in the world can I tell this story? It's painful for me, but to look her in the eye, to see that pain that she had at 13 years old, how can I speak and watch her relive this roller coaster? And so I was pretty upset. But I did what I always do. I called my parents, and guess what they said? They said, "Claire, you have every right to say no. This is your story. But just imagine what God will do if you're willing. Imagine how he will use you." And I hung up the phone like, dang it, I already know what I have to do. And so I called the people back, and I said, "Okay, I'll do it. She can come. I'll give the talk. It's going to be really hard. I might cry a lot, but we'll do it." And so she came. I gave the hardest talk I've ever given, as she did exactly what I thought she did. She cried in the front row the entire time. But afterwards, what happened was so incredible. I had the opportunity to bring her on stage, and instead of the painful tears that I saw as she relived those moments, after she heard my words and heard about the forgiveness of God and my forgiveness for her and the redemption in our story, I could tell as she walked up on the steps on that stage, she had a smile on her face. And the tears were gone from her eyes, and she raised our hands up together. She grabbed my hand and raised our hands up together as if to say victory. And what she didn't know was that my parents named me Lauren Claire Culwell, which means victorious one. And I knew as I stood there with my birth mother, hands held high, that we were victorious in that moment. We were victorious over what abortion had done to us, because I was no longer the reminder to her of what had happened to us at 13 years old. But instead, I was a reminder to her of how God had redeemed, healed, forgiven, and restored our relationship and our lives. And tonight, we have the same. We are victorious. We are victorious because one day we know Christ will come back and he will make all things new. And he will make all things right. But until that day comes, I want to encourage you to be that type of person that stands for truth, who prays for things that matters, who's bold in how you serve and how you love, who doesn't compromise or remain apathetic when it comes to things that are life or death for someone like me, for someone like my twin, for someone like you, for the generations to come, to wear forgiveness, grace, and mercy on your sleeves. And I want to ask you that question. Can you imagine what God will do if you're willing? Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.